we are glad to welcome you. Alice Menaker has a couple of words to say about why DimeStories, because it was Alice's child that kicked this off. So please, Alice.
Okay, I have a little story. A couple of months after my husband Peter died, I noticed that I found quite a few dimes lying around my house, on the floor and in pockets, in drawers, beside the bed. I kept seeing these dimes. And a friend came by and commented when she saw the pile that I'd assembled on the kitchen counter of these dimes. And she said that she had heard that dimes were a message from someone who had passed on. So I went with that. And since then, whenever I find a dime, and it seems to be quite often, I think of Peter. And I often also take dimes that I found and I put them in places around my house. So when I walk by, I see the dime and I say, hi. Last winter, I visited a friend in San Diego whose husband is a writer, and he's part of a group in San Diego called DimeStories. He explained that the group presented 5-minute stories, and some of which were published in a small review every year. And I read, he had the reviews there, and I read some of the stories, and I thought, this would be a wonderful idea to host this at Lismax Gallery. So with the help of Nora Lynn and Jane, we made it happen, and we started this summer, and here we are in the winter in the library.
Thank you, Alice. So, DimeStories, what the heck is it? It's all about being told a story. So all of the writers that we've invited today are telling a story either in prose or it's a true story that they've made into a fiction. Some of us are reading poems. So it's all about being told a story. So to that end, we're not going to have big, long introductions of every writer. Please consult your program for the details of the writer. We're simply going to invite them up by name, and they will launch into their story. So, that said, where's Fiona? There's Fiona. Fiona Patton will begin us off. Thank you, Fiona.
So I'm reading a small excerpt from a short story I wrote actually for a 2004 anthology called Little Red Riding Hood in the Big Bad City. The story is called Signs Are Hazy, Ask Again Later, and it's amazing how things have changed since I wrote the story. The Rink Pirates Memorial Hockey Arena parking lot resembled the aftermath of a demolition derby, with snow-covered cars and pickup trucks jammed in whenever they could find room, regardless of actual space. The wooden sign nailed above the side door reading, Super Jackpot and Progressive Bingo, 3 p.m. February 17th, explained why. Before. The arena canteen was so smoky the 300-odd players seated along both sides of the dozen chipped and burn-scarred tables could barely see the bingo caller. But the two young men who just entered never broke stride. Their eyes wide and dark, they scanned the room swiftly, then made for a central table where a wizened old woman, cigarette clenched in her teeth and bright pink bingo dabbers clenched in each fist, was busily working her own 3 12-game sheets and the single 6-game sheet of the heavy-set man beside her. As they approached, he looked up, red-rimmed eyes watering. "Brandon? Fred? Is that you?" The older of the two men, his own eyes returning to their usual blue, lit a cigarette before pushing up the brim of his Mill Valley co-op cap. "Hey, George, what the hell are you doing here?" "I-19? I-19." The man gave a helpless shrug, indicating the woman who showed no sign of breaking concentration even as she knocked the inch-long ash from her cigarette with a practiced jerk of her head. It landed in the general direction of the overbrimming ashtray beside her. "Well, I offered to give Cousin Maud a ride into town, Brandon," he explained weakly. "That was dumb." "Yes, well, you know, she's family." Where are we? I-16? I-16. As Fred took a seat beside him, he made a fruitless search through his pockets for a cigarette before slipping one from the old woman's pack. "Hey, Aunt Maud." Hey yourself, get out of there. She aimed a distracted slap in his direction before returning her attention to the sheets. N37, N37. Aw shit, George, pay attention, you missed another one. Her right side pink dauber slapped down onto the sheet in front of him, and only the four of them noticed she hadn't bothered to direct it with her hand. George started. Maud? Oh, sorry. He glanced sheepishly up at Brandon. I never will get used to that, he explained. In public, I mean. No one's looking even if they could see it, the younger man replied laconically before drawing up a chair. But I thought you couldn't take the smoke, George. Well, I can't ordinarily, but, well, Maud will need a ride home, and the storm's closed down half the town, including the library. I understand they have a special room where you can wait up at the Mill Valley Hall, but Maud prefers to play here in Greenville. Brandon snickered. Fred laughed outright. That's because they won't let her play in Mill Valley anymore, the younger of the two brothers scoffed. George bristled at his tone. Why in heaven's not? Fred glanced over at the old woman, who pointedly ignored him, then swore as N43 only elicited 8 daubs out of the 36 games. Roomy gray eyes suddenly very dark, she smiled as B6 found a home on 20 of them. She cheats. She turned an annoyed glance in his direction while her daubers flew across the sheets. Why don't you make yourself useful and get your great-great-auntie Maud a beer, she snapped, the steel in her voice belying the frailty of her body. 'Cause they don't sell beer in bingo halls? She gave him a disgusted look. Not from the snack bar, fool, from the cooler, down there. She jerked her chin towards her feet, liberally scattering ash across her light pink sweater. Oh. As Fred fished 2 doctored Pepsi bottles from the cooler beneath the table, Brandon glanced over at the pile of discarded ink-covered bingo games. So, who paid for all this? Well, George looked sheepish. 075, 075. If you must know, George treated me, Maud sniffed. Not that it's any of your business anyway. He's a proper gentleman. George shrugged modestly. It was only $18. Per book, plus the specials. Fred flipped through the games until Maud smacked his hand away. And the super jackpot. I hope you're going to split your winnings, Maud, Brandon said sternly. George waved his hand at him. It was my pleasure. Besides, your Aunt Maud hasn't won all afternoon, despite what you think. The actual odds of winning are 066, oh clickety-click, 066. Bingo! Maud's hand shot up in the air so fast her cigarette went flying. That the monthly $5 progressive? Brandon asked dryly as he retrieved it. Nothing else worth mojoing the bingo machine for, she answered out of the corner of her mouth. Here, she handed him the sheet. Take this up there and get my winnings. He frowned at her. Is this sheet legit? Of course it's legit. Get going. In the old days, she used to wipe the ink off the sheets and reuse them, Fred explained. But they put a stop to that by putting code numbers on them. Now she just mojos the machine by levitating the right balls. Only from time to time, she corrected stiffly, at the end of the month when I need a little extra cash. You know how it is when you're on a fixed income, don't you, George? He smiled weakly. Not quite yet. Oh, that's right. You're just 64, aren't you? Well, you'll learn.
All right, next, please, let's welcome Dorothy Speirs.
Good afternoon, everybody. My story this afternoon is called A Memorable Meal. Cela me ferait très plaisir de vous inviter à déjeuner la prochaine fois que vous serez à Paris. How could I resist an invitation like that? The letter came in the spring of 1982, when I was working as part of a collaborative academic team at the University of Toronto and the Université de Paris-Sorbonne. Under the aegis of the Canada Council, we were working on a 10-volume edition of the correspondence of French novelist Émile Zola. As the Toronto editor of the 4th volume, my initial undertaking had been the collecting of the 383 letters which covered the 1880 to 1883 period in Zola's life. For this reason, one of my colleagues had put forward my name as a source of information on how to gather a corpus of letters with a view to turning them into a critical edition. And because of her initiative, I received quite unexpectedly an elegant letter from a Parisian named Sébastien Lost. Monsieur Lost had spent his career in the top ranks of the French civil service. And he was at the time, as he wrote me, the maître des requêtes du Conseil d'État, that is the leader of France's Supreme Court for Administrative Justice. He had been trying, with only moderate success, he wrote, to track down letters written by his great-grandfather, Edmond About, a playwright who had been wildly successful during his lifetime, but who, after his death, passed into a realm of interest restricted to doctoral students in search of a dissertation topic. Monsieur Lost had collected Edmond About's letters from various members of his own family, but was at a loss as to how to proceed further. We entered into a correspondence during which I undertook a search in the European and North American libraries, which I had already contacted in the context of our Zola research. Happily, a number of About's letters surfaced during the investigation, hence the invitation I received just as I was leaving for a 3-month research stay in Paris. When the appropriate day for the lunch came, I felt extremely nervous. I dressed in my best outfit, a plum-colored wool suit with a pale pink ruffled blouse, the height of style in 1982. The outfit was set off by matching shoes with 4-inch heels. And today I still marvel that I was able to walk in those shoes all day over the Paris cobblestones without suffering inordinately or turning an ankle. We had agreed to meet at Monsieur Lost's office at the Conseil d'État, which is located in the Palais Royal complex, where he also had his private apartment overlooking the palace gardens. I found the office without difficulty, and Monsieur Lost was waiting. A short, slight man, he had thinning brown hair and a small mustache, and looked, in fact, very much like my mental image of a middle-aged Hercule Poirot. He greeted me very graciously and suggested that if I wished, we might walk the short distance to the restaurant which he had chosen for lunch. If I had been apprehensive about meeting one of France's leading civil servants, the restaurant added to my insecurity. Although I considered myself at the time quite well-traveled and familiar with some rather nice restaurants, Le Grand Véfour left me breathless. Opened in the arcades of the Palais Royal in 1784, the restaurant is a jewel of early 19th century decor with large mirrors in gilded frames and painted ornamental moldings throughout. As we entered, I tried to take in my surroundings, the carved paneling and neoclassical paintings on the walls, as well as the stucco garlands framing more paintings on the ceiling, without looking like a typical North American tourist. 2, I knew that the restaurant was the haunt of the cultural and political elite of Paris. So, as the host led us to our table, I scanned the room in search of Jean-Paul Sartre or Simone de Beauvoir. Monsieur Lost installed me on the red velvet banquette and, in keeping with the etiquette of the time, took the matching chair facing me. The meal began in a delightful fashion. He ordered 2 glasses of Kir Royal to celebrate our meeting from a bar which reminded me of the one painted by Manet in the Bar aux Folies Bergères. However, when the waiter arrived to take our order, doubt about what to choose set in. I had certainly had my share of culinary adventures before this occasion. A dinner in Cassis during the years I lived in Marseille in the 1970s, when my host served his guests his recent catch of alouette as the main course. Apparently, the little creatures are caught when they land on branches which has been treated with a sticky substance, and then are subsequently served roasted in their entirety. Custom demands that they be picked up by their tiny beaks and consumed whole. Pizza au soupion, that is pizza dotted with small octopus, was another discovery from the same era, a result of the extremely unwise act of ordering a menu item in which one of the terms is unfamiliar. However, a dining room in Cassis and a pizza restaurant in Marseille were no match for Le Grand Vifour. And so, afraid to commit a gustatory faux pas, and in the hopes that my maneuver would make me appear sophisticated, I insisted that Monsieur Lost order for both of us. He smiled, closed the menu, and said to the waiter, "Le grand plat d'huître, s'il vous plaît." It must be said here that until this point, my acquaintance with oysters had been limited to the tin smoked variety, which were normally served in our University of Toronto social circle on a Triscuit covered with cream cheese. Not so at Le Grand Vifour. The platter duly arrived, and with some ceremony, the enormous tray was set upon a stand in the middle of the table. On the tray, dozens of raw oysters were displayed in a thick bed of crushed ice. However, in spite of the elaborate presentation, I confess that the thought of actually eating those slimy gray objects was quite revolting. Fortunately, I spied a basket of brown bread on the table, and I reasoned that if I could stuff my mouth with enough bread and then pop in an oyster, I might be able to swallow it all with a minimum of distaste. And so I did. After a few oysters, however, the bread stocks were running low. Monsieur Lost, like the perfect host, however, continued to encourage me to eat more. "Mais reprenez-en, madame, reprenez-en." Eventually, the meal was at an end, and I realized that I'd been so focused on simply getting through it that I had no memory whatsoever of what must have been a most interesting conversation. Sadly, Monsieur Lost died in 1985 and never finished his manuscript, which is still, as far as I know, in the Archives Nationales with his other papers. I will spare you the narrative of how I passed the rest of the day and the evening after my extraordinary luncheon. Suffice it to say that the mere mention of oysters still causes my stomach to lurch a bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Dorothy. And now please welcome Elis Ziegler.
Now for something completely different. There's several people in the room that have provided me with feedback for this, for which I'm very grateful, but no pressure. This is the opening actually of one of three revenge fiction stories. And this one is set in cottage country, Ontario. It's called Wasiday Lake. Gadaki is like any other town in cottage country, Ontario. Nestled along a large inland lake with a major highway going through, it's lucky enough to hold up year-round for residents and tourists alike. Main Street Gadaki is a standard 3 blocks running alongside a rise parallel to the lakeshore. The picturesque view to the mountains on the other side are appreciated by anyone coming into town for their shopping. Smack in the middle of that stretch is a 2-story building with a 2-door facade meant to be classy, home of the Lakeside Bar and Grill, as announced by the backlit sign. It's a split-level operation with a vestibule entrance on the main street, which, when you enter, gives you the choice of destinations. You can head upstairs, where you're asked to be seated for cloth napkin tables and ferns hanging from the ceiling, or head down to the pub, home of dark paneling and a 20-foot bar along a narrow space that opens to a patio that stretches as far as the marina docks. "Well, aren't I just an effing cliche?" a well-dressed woman said, just loud enough to be heard. Hank watched her clink the ice in her glass as she sat at the corner in the dark cool. She looked down the bar to the patio in the sun, where red umbrellaed tables greeted the incoming shirtless, tanned, pot-bellied men and slim women in bikinis who paraded off their pleasure craft from the dock beyond. "You're drinking a Campari and soda, ma'am." "I hardly think so," Hank said, winking as he wiped dry a tray of pint glasses and set them behind them. Part of Hank's job was to gauge customers for drunkenness, ability to pay, when to leave people alone or let his ear get bent. The woman in front of him was, well, expensive, Hank thought. Perfectly straight chin-length blonde hair, crisp indigo linen outfit, iPhone face down at the ready. Yet here she was, day drinking, looking at the people coming and going from the dock. "Welcome to the Lakeside Pub and Grill in famous downtown Gadaki," Hank announced in a radio voice.
Well, thank you for your optimism. Here I am, though, in the middle of the cottage country, in the middle of the afternoon, in the middle of a drink, surrounded by dead stuffed fish and hockey sticks. No offense, eh? The woman said. None taken. We like good cliches here. Keeps things predictable, replied Hank as he scanned the bar rail inventory for the evening rush. What brings you to Gadaki? Miriam. I'm waiting for my sister. We, my family, have a cottage on Wasiday Lake. It's on an island just off Black Cove, so we meet up and take the skiff over. Except either I'm really early or she's really late, so here I am with my Campari, explained Miriam. Gotcha, Miriam. I'm Hank. Feel free to nurse that drink. Hank couldn't help to sort people. It was his job, that and the ability to make a killer Caesar. Of the people from away, Miriam was from the I have my own cottage type of tourist, as opposed to the I drag around boat, hunting gear, skidoo between campgrounds type of tourist. Then there are the working visitors, salesmen, engineers, tradespeople, who come just for as long as it takes to do the job, stopping in the pub because there's nowhere else for anyone to be. And then there's the rest of us, Hank thought, in Ontario cottage country, like Bud over here, as he watched Bud Williams at the other end of the bar looking at Miriam. Bud was the I never left high school type of guy. Hank was never a fan of Bud, not too many people were. He was just that guy in high school. Football built, just that side of good looking, too familiar, especially with the girls. When he graduated, he managed to get on the police force for a few years, but drinking caught up with him. Or was it lifting drug evidence he intended to sell? He'd been a landscaper ever since, hauling the riding mowers and snow blowers when he worked, a Sea-Doo or a snowmobile around the back of his truck when he didn't. Hank leaned over to Bud with his back to Miriam and said, "It isn't polite to stare, Bud." "Yeah, but ain't she a beaut? I'd like to take that for a ride," Bud said, nodding his head toward Miriam, starting to rise from his bar stool. "I'll just go over and—" "Oh, no, you're not, Bud," Hank said, putting a firm hand on Bud's shoulder. "She's not a beaut like a 74 Trans Am. Time to finish up your beer and head on out. It's your third." "Geez, Hank, fine," Bud replied, as he slapped down some bills on the bar, still leering at Miriam. "I'm out." As he turned from the bar and headed via the patio toward the docks, "I'll do my sightseeing out there." Hank wiped down the bar where Bud had been and took the glass with an exhale. "Sorry about that," he said to Miriam. "There's always that one, Hank. Thanks for handling him. Maybe I will have another, please," Miriam asked, as she pushed her glass across the bar. Glad he got Bud out of the bar, Hank made Miriam's drink. Bud is exactly that one. A local who couldn't see past himself, let alone the town limit signs, and a pig to boot. Hank himself was as local as it got in Gadaki. His family, both sides, were part of the lumber industry going back to the 1800s, hauling lumber, milling lumber, driving lumber around because that's what you did. Hank left town in his teens because that's also what you did when you weren't Bud. How he got back is another story, but here he was, tending bar in his hometown restaurant. He got by, surrounded daily by people he knew his whole life. Works just fine, Hank thought.
Wonderful. Thank you. So that was Elis Ziegler, and now I would like to welcome Dawn Miller. There she is. Hello, Dawn. Come on up.
Thanks, everyone. I'm going to read a story called Luna. It's from Fractured Literary Anthology 2. From her window seat on the train, Ruth watches the cluster of teenage boys on the platform. They posture in the dusk as a tall girl, black hair swinging in a high ponytail, draws near. As she skirts the group, their boldness swells, and the boys whoop and holler. Ruth fumbles for a caramel along the bottom of her purse, removes the silvery foil, and pops it in her mouth, sucking hard to savor the sweetness, as the girl fades in the distance. Once Ruth starred in such a vignette. A wide-shouldered fellow with a full dark beard takes a seat across the aisle facing her. He looks so like Thomas when they met a lifetime ago. Broad, powerful hands, square-shaped nails. She concentrates on the view out the window, but his presence tugs on her, dragging her eyes back. She can almost feel the warmth of his palms against her face, the sharp muskiness of sweat, moist lips kissing carpentry calluses. Thomas. Gone for 2 years, each day longer than the one before. She prayed she'd go first. The bearded man's eyes skim across her face, a glance, less than a whisper. Once his gaze would have lingered over her creamy skin and thick auburn hair tied back with a red velvet ribbon. Once he would have sought her gaze and smiled. She crunches the last of the candy, sticky bits clinging between her dentures, as the train shudders and lumbers forward. The man flashes a sharp look at her and shifts to stare out the window, arms crossed. Heat blooms up Ruth's chest into her cheeks. He must think her a crazy old bat, gawking like that. She licks her sugary lips, dampening tender cracks resistant to beeswax and aloe, and focuses on the Russian trees and how the moonlight casts ghostly shadows across the landscape. Thomas called her Luna, beautiful and mysterious as the moon. And now he is the moon, drifting through the heavens, while she is left pinned to earth like a beetle squirming under glass. Her children will be shocked at first, horrified. The room they arranged at the nursing home looked nice enough on the tour, but it is tiny and she has a lifetime of possessions. Sheila, her oldest, separated her belongings into categories: give away, donate, take to the dump, keep. The size of the piles in ascending orders. Like a set of Russian dolls, her world is shrinking. Mum told me I'd get the Hummels, Sheila informed her younger brother Charles the last time they came. Poor Charles threw his hands up in the air, giving as always, a born peacekeeper, like his father. Ruth witnessed the exchange from her easy chair. They thought she was engrossed in the fighting on Judge Judy, but she knew what was going on right under her nose. For a moment she considered snatching the row of porcelain figurines from the display case and smashing them on the linoleum, snapping the head off Goose Girl, making Apple Tree Boy plunge from the branches. Thomas bought the Hummels for her, each figure tied to a memory between them. They meant nothing to Sheila, other than money. After they left, Ruth took a permanent marker and wrote Sheila or Charles in shaky letters on the bottom of each figurine, 50-50. Otherwise, Sheila might scoop them all up. Such a bitter thing to love your child, but not like her very much. At the next stop, the bearded man disembarks. He stands on the platform, searching right and left. Go where your heart is, Ruth wants to shout. That's what she's doing, writing the final act herself. The train picks up speed and her heart leaps at the thought of seeing Thomas. She leans forward, willing the train to go faster. The full moon made her decision. Tonight is the perfect night. Clutching her purse, she readies for the next stop, a sleepy town on the edge of the Saugeen River. Thomas caught many a trout in those waters, swirling with hidden life. Many years ago, they attempted to swim there, but the current almost carried her away, and he'd wrapped his muscled arms around her, pulling her close. She laces her palsied fingers together, bones fragile as a bird's neck, and inspects the crescent moons at the base of each fingernail. Lunula. She whispers the word, her tongue kissing her palate with each syllable, the word ripe as a berry in her mouth. She is water, bending to the pull of the moon, to the mystery ahead, to Thomas. She will become Luna again.
Thank you so much, Dawn. And now I'd like to welcome Andrew. Where are you, Andrew McLuhan? There he is. Welcome, Andrew.
Hey, thank you all for coming out. It's a standing room only, which is great. I'm going to read the first part of what's supposed to be a 7-part series on the 7 liberal arts, but I've only got as far as the first part. And it's itself in 5 parts, followed by, if I don't go too long, a reflection I wrote this week on the whole thing. It's called 5 Bloody Cannons. Into the crown knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. T.S. Eliot, The Wasteland. 1. More than to explore, discovery once won, recovery what's lost, division, scattering of parts, fragmentation of the arts and crafts, built and launched to find land at last, to reach, feel, fumble, to face fears and breach as years cascade, tumble, shape and smooth, and tame and humble, tire. The cost the journey demands, requires. Here lies hope. Prospects as desperate as grim, rafts built by lashing them, to float toward, seize the wind that howled, roared. The gyre turned, but we pushed forward that we would stand, beaten, bloodied, feet on sandy beach, and what in sight, hard won in each labored breath, a hint of death. 2. On arrival, to set about, assemble, arrange, ponder patterns, seeing strange sights, what repels, attracts, unites the words to speak, to make concrete, to take each piece, to seek the sight of sound delight, when found the fit, will light the way, will test the wit. Where relation is warm, calculation cold, precise, decision, concise, controlled, things in place, no room for error, the terror of time, the horror of space, the fear, some dissonance lurks somewhere near. When all laid out, fit together, no thought for doubt, for fear, forever. 3. Once I saw, could not unsee, divisions uniting, untying me. Ceaseless, untiring scent of science, a conspiracy of salience so rich as to sicken, slick and stinging, lightning bringing sharp tastes, enthrall of the thrill which weakens the will. While at the helm of overwhelm, blinded by the sight of sound, barriers broke. The voice of the void, creation, spoke. Laugh, always laugh. For laughter is a sweet destruction, what sets apart. What craft carries your beating heart, shining shapes which tell the youth all the hopes, the dawning truth, the twinkle in the eye, the proof, the spark, to set afire a burning art. 4. Subtle hints, a fleeting glimpse, shadows seen. Strike, said he, they struck. A tale arrives, whispered words, courage now. The hour approaches, wake and take command. Can and be damned, a plan demands a hand that can recall the words and how to say them all. I slept, I wept, swept from the heat, try as I might, could not repeat the night's tale told in the cold of sleep. Such force, remorse, a sorry story. Stars in the heaven to prove, confirm, make mere mortals squirm, move, shift. Let time swallow the leavings left. We walk, we talk, we part believing we will meet again some evening. Then I wake from dreaming, having had the experience but missed the meaning. 5. Delivered. Ends which bend to begin again. Dare we face a place, a frontier, a sphere, where the seer says to go ahead, to melt your mind, leaving everything behind with no goodbyes to anyone, but leap into the abyss, to dance with chance, laughter ever after, or melodious screams no clever knowing, where we're going, only being. To land, where you stood, now there you stand, the waste, vast function of speed, blinding fast, slow to show, beauty between. Go on, ever through the once-upons. We find ourselves in places which remind ourselves of tales we're told we tell ourselves, against the cold, the warm of spring, the dawn of old, the very things giving life, enlivening. But wait, there's more. So I wrote that 2 years ago, and like I said, it's part 1 of a poem cycle on the 7 liberal arts, and I'm not sure I'll ever finish it, so I wrote this, even if I never finish the whole thing. It's much shorter. I'm not sure now, thinking back, when I thought it might end, or even when I began. I had in mind a grand plan, a cycle, something worthy, substantial, vital, to make myself, if only myself, proud, and I allowed myself the conceit. Now, gone awry, removed from fantasy, I have arrived at despair, finding myself not desperate there. There's surely a place for ambition, poetic or not, a moon, a Mars to aim for, and if it takes time to arrive, so what? And if we never arrive, so what? Pursuit is its own reward, its own end, and travels of its own accord. Maybe the one is all I get. Maybe the others remain like Mars, distant objects, ideas seen from afar, never reached but observed, admired, a goal to never reach, but to stretch, to seek a way. Maybe that's enough.
Andrew, thank you. Now I'd like to welcome Jill Hill.
I want to thank the organizers of this fabulous event in this wonderful place. I think they've done a terrific job. And welcome. I have to warn you, and I'm including everyone in my group of my family and friends, there is no point in speaking to me before I've had my shower. Even my youngest grandchildren, I think, know that if Grammy is still wearing her dressing gown, she can't hear a word you're saying. This is because, in addition to serious hearing loss, I also suffer from frequent bouts of absent-mindedness. So if I leap into the shower wearing my hearing aids, there's a risk of a couple of $1,000 going down the drain. Well, that's my excuse. But in truth, the reason is that in this noisy world, I have come to relish the silence of my mornings. A while back, my colleague from Writers on Block, Nora Lynn Vevers, who's here today, suggested the group look at the poetic form, the villanelle. And if we wanted, we could try to write one. Normally, I'm a memoir writer, but this has managed to be incorporated into a villanelle. As the name suggests, the villanelle was French in origin, but much employed by British writers in the 19th century. And contemporary poets have used the form to good effect, including the writer that many of us know, Shani Mutu. Something like the sonnet, the villanelle has prescribed stanza lengths, rhyming patterns, and length in all. Shani passed on some suggestions, including the one that the villanelle was suited to a dilemma. What of this? What of that? Maybe yes, maybe no. Which is why I decided it was suitable for this poem. And if there are any poetry police in the rooms, I confess to having played a bit fast and loose with the rules and regulations of the villanelle, so I hope you go easy on me. The villanelle is entitled, I Hear You. My family's made me wear these doodads in my ears, so I can hear their every precious word. Oh, how I miss those blessed silent years. Hark, how this crashing world comes battering in, the clattering, clanging, crunching sounds intrude. Oh God, where are those blessed silent years? In city parks, I'm pondering life's hopes and fears. Roaring traffic renders quiet thoughts absurd. Where is the blessed silence of my deafened years? But there are joyful noises that one hears, music and children, bells, and oh, the birds. All these I missed in many deafened years. I lacked the converse of my nears and dears when gems of wit and wisdom went unheard in all those wasted hours of silent years. I vow I'll wear these doodads in my ears. Come friends and family, gather all around. I'll say goodbye to all the silent years. Reluctantly, I'll trade the silence for the sound.
Thank you, Jill. Now I would like to please welcome Paulette. Paulette Rothbauer, everybody. Please welcome Paulette.
So I'm going to read a couple of what I'm calling memory fragments that are part of a larger project that I'm working on, where I'm using my personal library of books as a kind of index to biography and as a kind of index to memory. And so the first fragment is inspired both by a poem by Kimberly Stinson, who was an honorable mention award winner in the Wind and Water contest in 2022, and by a short comment on a New York Times article on a Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes exhibit at the Grolier Club in 2005. And so that first fragment, which I'll read first, it's indexed to the Faber collection of Sylvia Plath. And then the second poem, we'll call it, is indexed to one of my many, or to my many readings of the Odyssey, which is one of my favorite stories. So the first one is called From Communion to Cliché, a reading fragment. Sylvia and Virginia, Virginia and Sylvia, mostly Sylvia. The Faber collected poems from the high school library, stolen before anyone could sign it out. I never did feel guilty about it. Mr. Temford, the new school librarian, with his full beard and his brown tweedy suits, silver rings with semi-precious stones, turquoise, malachite, lapis lazuli, he knew I had it and probably thought I'd return it. He'd left it sitting out on the table where only I sat. A gift, it seemed. Mr. Temford didn't last long in my county school. He couldn't have known just how eager I was for anything to mean something, for the alchemy of words and ideas and form that would awaken a hungry need for poetry, for the way words could hammer at my intellect and squeeze my heart muscle. It was shocking, really, addictive. The book's staid and sturdy paper cover, the double F pattern on purple, a calm wrapper for the tempest inside. I think of it as from my before life, before I knew myself as an adult, before I grew skeptical of poetic urgency, before I would come to understand the sameness of everyday life, before I understood that there could be peace in that sameness and there could be beauty, before I recognized the communion of women who loved Sylvia Plath, before I knew about the fan club, the embarrassment of being cliché, the reduction to an internet meme, before I knew that all lives are ordinary as the late entries in Plath's daybook. Frida, school, Ted, paint 3 bureaus. Then this next fragment is called The Myth of Forgiveness. Of course, it kind of has to be if it's indexed to the Odyssey. Forgive me, I say, way-worn and weary. I've been away a while. For you. I stamp red mud off my boots. My clothes are torn at the elbows and the knees. My jeans worn out at one back pocket. My hair cut short, shot through with gray. But I like it this way. I've stood on the shores of oceans, listening to angels call my name from the bottom of the waves, while I spied the fine, fine features of a siren in the clouds above me. It's true. It's true. I've been in places where the men were all swine, kept in a pen by a beautiful witch who loved me, and then lifted me asleep into a gentle rocking boat, and with a whisper that sounded like loss, pushed me hard into the arms of the sea. I drifted, I slumbered, I sang, and I remembered my beloved. So forgive me, I say. I've forgotten your name.
Thank you. And now I would like to please welcome Deborah Whittle. Please welcome Deborah Whittle.
Thank you. Something Jane said earlier about one of the beauties of fiction is allowing to take real events in your life and then looking at them through made-up characters, or taking a sad event and giving it a happy ending. Or what I've done with this story is work out my own fears by taking a sad story and making it even sadder. This is Funeral Pants. Moira fingered the fabric in her closet, a winter wool designer suit purchased at an outlet store. Her mother had been with her then, Mom's first spur-of-the-moment trip outside the house in years. The suit was fine, her mother said, but maybe a little snug, perhaps one size up. Moira complied. 2 days later, her mother patted her hand. The eulogy was lovely, dear, but all I could think about was what a great job you'd done in hemming those pants. Moira laughed bleakly at the memory of her father's funeral. Her family wasn't one to feel their feelings. She'd been pleased to give her mother something else to think about that sad day. A decade had passed since then, and the hem had held. Moira knew she'd been lucky. At 49, her dad was the first funeral for which she'd chosen her own outfit, her grandparents and other families and friends having died when she was a child. At the age of 59, there were too many funerals. She'd worn the original pants to mourn her business partner in January, and then she bought a new, lighter-weight pair of flared black capris to wear when her neighbor passed in May. Too bad, she thought, that Mom hadn't been with her for the purchase. The capris were snug by her brother-in-law's celebration of life in June, and then downright bladder constricting by the time her best friend succumbed to cancer in September. Condolence carbs took a toll on her waistline. 2019 was a horrible year. Moira's funeral pants saw far too much action. She welcomed 2020. It had to be better. In February, she ignored a niggling feeling that she should fly home to visit her mother, and she went to Maui instead, celebrating her 60th birthday, sipping Mai Tais from an outrageously fruit-festooned pineapple. By March, it was too late. The funeral home wasn't allowing visitors. As the months wore on, Moira thought of her mother daily, while also bearing the existential toll of the pandemic. No after-work cocktails, no visits, no family feasts, no hugs. Mothers, fathers, sons, daughters, all loved and mourned through iPad screens. Funerals cruelly curtailed and live-streamed. And that, eventually, was how she said goodbye to her mother, the woman who taught her to sew, to sing, and to laugh. A blurry image on a smudge screen of a woman stabbing with weakening fingers at a call button for help that never came. There is something far worse than too tight funeral pants, Moira knew, tears dampening the fabric in her hand. 2020 brought too many funerals, and no need for pants at all.
Thank you, Deborah. But not finally. What's the word? Our penultimate reader. Please welcome Sarah Williams.
Okay, I apologize if I can't reach the people in the back. I've got a bit of a raspy voice right now, so This is a story called Bear in the Basement, and it's what I call reimagined history based on a true story. It's part of a collection of short stories I'm working on, and if I ever get that published, you can find out the ending to it. Okay, so it was mid-afternoon, and the sun had already begun to sift through the feathery boughs of pine trees encircling the old church. Jack felt the clapboard grooves against his back as he leaned behind the door. Bits of straw and twine from the bird's nest sitting in the corner above his head had been plastered above the doorframe. The nest was empty, and the summer heat reminded Jack that it was August 1960. He would soon be going back east where he studied. But for now, he was here, working at Lake Louise with the rest of the university students and ex-Nazis that ran the resort in the summer months. He was here, every hair standing straight like a sundial, marking the moments. Then his eyes settled on the bottom of the door. There was, he had not realized until this moment, half a foot of space revealing his feet clad in dress shoes and bits of grass. That's when he saw the bear. Its moist snout searched and smelled Jack's feet, beads of saliva strung like pearls on her quivering whiskers. At that moment, in a small town in Ohio, Eugene was buying eggs, milk, and butter at his local A&P. It was a Wednesday, which for him was the same as any day. Nobody knew where Eugene was except Eugene and, of course, the mailman. He's gone west, his friends and family would say, conjuring visions of the prodigal son who might one day return, but had thus far remained absent. This was not his first disappearing act. In the summer of 1928, Eugene traveled to Chicago via freight train. He shipped turnips across the border to conceal barrels of moonshine, nestled safely in the smell of dirt and root vegetables, from the ground in his small island community in southern Ontario, known then as Canada's garden capital for its fertile soils that grew everything from peas to peaches. He'd be gone 9 months. When he returned home, Eugene was a father. Jack and his 5 friends stood in the basement of the church, taking swigs from a communal bottle of whiskey. The basement was bare, save for a few stacks of chairs against the far wall, an old wardrobe full of ministerial gowns now collecting dust, and a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, suffocating stoically under a glass encasement of dirt and time. This was not a religious ceremony. They were going to trap a bear. "Let's draw straws," one friend said. "The person who draws the short straw has to let the bear out after we trap it." They huddled together, a look of relief rolling over each friend's face as they drew. Jack knew he would get the short straw. Still, the sweat dripped down his back in anticipation. "Bears won't hurt you, unless it's a mama bear and her cubs," he would later say with an air of nonchalance that belied those few moments when Jack thought the bear might eat his toes for breakfast. Danger has a way of illuminating every second, bringing time to a standstill. For Jack, this moment would shine with blinding intensity until the day he died. The bear's nostrils twitched several times, searching his shoes for sign of a threat, then turned and walked away, her haunches rolling slowly like molasses as she descended into the conifers.
Thank you, Sarah. And now finally, please welcome Sarah Selecki.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Norlin and Jane and Alice, for inviting me. This has been wonderful. I'm going to read 3 short pieces from some experiments I've been putting together. I think that's the only introduction I probably need. Pollen. Everything always reminds me of something else. Everything we live in is made of the same stuff, so it can all be used in metaphor, if you open yourself up to what connects it. Yesterday morning, the cedar trees were giving off pollen in great big clouds. A breeze would come, and then a giant puff of golden smoke billowed out of the forest across the road. Ryan and Andrew were talking, and I interrupted when, out of nowhere, another cloud puffed up right above their heads like a dragon's exhale. I felt like we were watching a rare show, and to ignore it would have been rude. This morning, it's cloudy and raining, and the rain's coming down in a fine mist. Tiny ball droplets of rain move in the air like they were spritzed from an atomizer. The wind gusts, and the mist rain blows and flies around, dancing in my window. The mist is like the pollen. It's also like flour clapped from your hands when you make pizza dough. It's like the dust behind a truck when it drives down a dirt road. It's like your best friend's hairspray when she got ready for the concert that night. And of course, it's like the stars and planets in the Milky Way itself, moving and billowing and expanding infinitely around us. It doesn't have to mean anything or be for anything. You don't have to give it any form or result. That it exists as metaphor is enough. Or maybe you do want to give it a form or a name or something to contain it. That would also be lovely. Maybe that's what writing can be. A poem, an essay, a TV show, or a book. It's a container for the mist. That's everything we are. Oak. Yesterday at Sheffield Park, the oaks had so many of their crumpled old leaves still attached, and the new buds were coming out underneath and around them. They dropped many leaves too, of course, and our feet crunched along a path of matted oak leaves. But the little folded and curled fists upon the bare branches, how could they still be there? A whole stand of dead trees had fallen over, blown by the winter wind just 10 feet away. How could these oak leaves remain when entire trees had fallen? And why do they hold on? As we hiked, my friend told me about her job. She's getting migraines from the computer and working 50 and 60-hour weeks. She wanted to leave her job a year ago, but for financial reasons, she decided to stay. She's working these long hours to save the money, so one day she could leave this job and work on her own practice, teaching and writing. She built herself a website on the weekends. The start of her new life's work is budding now, even as she works at this old job. I'm writing these words in a blank notebook I purchased for my novel. The first 2/3 of these pages are filled with writing about another world, characters and dimensions away from me. I wrote the first draft quickly, and last week, a full 9 months after I finished the last page of that first draft, I decided to take a hiatus. I spent those 9 months looking at the manuscript, a stack of printed pages on my desk. I'd written a novel. It was magical and incoherent. It was the most astounding thing I'd ever written and the ugliest thing I'd ever written. I went through page by page, trying to revise it as I went, searching to find the voice, tense, and point of view. I tried past tense in a big fairy tale voice, but I felt like I was forcing it. I tried present tense, but I couldn't feel my protagonist's consciousness. Point of view was beyond me. Little images blinked up, asking to be written more carefully, which I did when I could. I skated over the big decisions like voice and perspective, and I gave myself over to describing the texture of jam on toast, linen clothes, and tree bark. As I revised by hand, I transcribed a scene at a time. It was very satisfying to crumple up each page and to see the pile of crumpled paper grow beside my desk. I viewed this pile as a sign that I was moving forward. Still, the stack of unrevised pages weighed heavily at the top left corner of my desk. I was baffled by it. I didn't know how to honor this story. I'd written it so fast I didn't recognize it. This was stimulating. I was excited and completely intimidated. Who should revise it? Certainly not me. I was neither prepared nor equipped for the writing this book required. Finally, I put the stack of pages away in the left-hand drawer of my desk, and I began to write in this notebook again, but this time I wrote about the things I see in nature, the things I think about writing and living. The oak tree doesn't drop all its leaves because maybe it doesn't have to.
Maybe this is a sign of its strength. Those dry leaves provide shelter and real security to creatures. Squirrels use them as nest materials, caterpillars as cocoons. Those leaves store nitrogen, provide moisture-saving mulch. The oak knows how to be patient and how to save her materials for later. Some decisions take more time. Just because others have dropped their leaves doesn't mean everyone has to. When the willows are breezy in their chartreuse dress and meet the spring snowmelt with that bright flowing energy, the oak can appear stodgy and lifeless. But these oaks live in rock, not near water like willow. What are they, 500 years old? They know what they're doing. Wasp. I'm sitting here at my desk and there are 2 frisky wasps circling me and hanging out, loitering like mall rats near a little bouquet on my desk. One keeps flying into my hair, scaring me. When I woke up this morning, my mind was full of so many questions. It really, really wanted something to do. It was asking me to tell it the best thing to do so it could get started. It knew enough to pepper me with questions first. I've trained it, and sometimes it remembers the training. So once I was awake enough to open my eyes, I rolled over to get my journal. I wrote down the questions, which were all about the result of my writing. Writers come back to square one regularly, or at least I do. I don't actually know what it's like for other writers. Maybe they progress in a consistent forward motion, going from book to book or project to project, knowing what they're doing. I do not. So my mind wanted to know, why am I writing the story I'm writing? Is it a novel or a screenplay? What should I tell my agent about it at this stage? Should I get help with the story? It's complicated. Or it feels complicated right now with subplots and timelines that confuse me. Maybe I should leave it and just write for the pleasure of it. Forget about writing another book or publishing anything. Meanwhile, one wasp sticks its whole head into the bell of a yellow flower. Half of its body is swallowed by this little flower on my desk as he searches for pollen or sweetness or whatever wasps look for in flowers. There are 2 small pink hyacinths also in the arrangement, multiple blooms trumpeting out of the stalks like celebrations. It's a spring bouquet with tulips and ranunculus and tiny sprays of leafy stems studded with buds the size of peppercorns. So I let myself go into the flowers, like the wasp. I stick my whole head in there until the questions don't matter as much as the petals themselves. The only problem is that sometimes I'm convinced there's more to it than that. That there's something else I must do to feel okay or good or right or whatever, when really the truth of everything is in those small petals. When I can truly see them, golden yellow with transparent tips, 6 petals layered on top of each other to form a cup shape, I remember the most important thing. I mean, it's so obvious.
Well, thank you, Sarah. That's it. Thank you for coming.